We're studying biblical wisdom, and 2 weeks ago we began a discussion of what biblical wisdom is not, and we began to explore the differences between being smart and being wise. I want to thank Mark Kinchy for teaching last week on the importance of friendship. Mark shared with me a very significant statement after his teaching. He said, "I learned that the next best thing to being wise oneself is to live in a circle of those who are." And I thought that was a great statement. Having a high intellect and being well read and knowing a lot of Bible verses does not mean that you have godly wisdom. Wisdom is the effective application of knowledge, and wisdom is using what you know effectively. So wisdom is not simply knowing how to solve problems, it's knowing how to avoid problems. So what's the difference between how to solve a problem and knowing how to avoid a problem? Can you give an example? I'll just share this paragraph, and then maybe you can share an example. Wisdom is not just the ability to fix something or how to navigate through problems. Wisdom is the ability to forecast without being too concerned for knowing the future as a soothsayer, prophet, or fortune teller, or prognosticator, as the Bible warns us about, but someone who can see the possible outcomes of decisions we make in our daily lives. So, what's the difference between knowing how to solve problems and knowing how to avoid problems? What are your thoughts on that? Now, you have to have some thoughts. We're a small group, so I need you to participate here. Did it shut off? We need to leave it on. Yeah, leave it on. Go ahead.
Okay, this isn't really an answer, but to me, being around people and being able to discuss things that are coming up, we get a better perspective and sometimes are showed the consequences, of making the wrong decision by other people.
That's great. Yeah, it's great insight. I meet regularly with a group of men, and it really helps because if you have something you're concerned about, wondering about, you just ask them and you get a variety of opinions, you get a variety of suggestions, and many of them are very helpful in us sorting things out. To have some people you're close to, kind of what Mark was talking about last week with respect to friendships, you have a friendship that's willing to look out for you. It isn't just that they're there for themselves, but they really have an interest in you and your best interests. Someone else?
Wisdom is having a little bit more than just experience, but when I think of a wise person, I think of somebody that has gone through certain experiences, and then those folks have the ability to say, wow, I've kind of been there before, and I don't want to get into that difficult spot down the road, and so you can use your wisdom to try to navigate before it gets to that bad position, right? And so to me, it's kind of like tying in that experience part and the value of that, so that we don't have to go through the hard times.
Yeah, very true. Was asked, how do you get good judgment? And the answer was, by using bad judgment. And then you learn over time how to use good judgment. And I think there's a lot of truth in the experience of failing. And failure isn't all bad. I was thinking of that this morning. Pastor Bob mentioned that Dan and Karen Reed have had 40 years of blissful marriage. And I thought, boy, we haven't had blissful marriage. We've been married 43. Wonder how that happens. And then I thought, but we've learned a lot about how to love one another in those 43 years. And I think the bumps are what you climb on sometimes, and it's been good. So I think that experience is valuable for all of us, and you have to be involved to have those experiences. You can't just always sit on the sidelines. Sometimes you have to take some risks. Sometimes you have to trust the Lord. Sometimes you get slapped down. I always used to say, I worked with PhD students at the university, and I did that for 15 years, and they were getting their doctorate. And I just remember what I had to go through, and they would say, I don't know if I can do this. And I'd say, just remember, when you get slapped back, fall forward. Just keep falling forward and keep moving toward the goal. And don't give up, because a lot of it has to do with perseverance in life. It isn't always it's going to work out well. You have to have the understanding that it may not come naturally to you. It may be difficult for you. You may have obstacles other people don't have. But if you just persevere, if you really know that that's the right path, and you persevere, that's very meaningful. We try to teach that in education with students, and math seems to be the difficult problem. Students pick up math problems and say, can't get it, it's no good. I'm no good in math. No, you just haven't figured it out yet. You just need to keep working toward it. Keep working, don't give up. Have the understanding that you have the capacity. You just don't have it maybe the same way someone else does, but you'll get it eventually. Just keep at it. Any other thoughts on how to avoid problems? I mentioned this thing about forecasting. Yeah, good, great. I wondered who you were. I didn't recognize you with your outfit.
I'm John Knox.
Okay.
Bruce Walke did some teaching on the Proverbs. He was a Hebrew professor at Dallas. And he said one of the themes of the Proverbs is, we say, live and learn. And he said, no, it's learn and live.
And you have to spend time in God's Word, in prayer, and meeting with people who love the Lord, to have some of those opportunities come your way to grow, because it just doesn't happen by accident. It takes your volition, your initiative. Dave?
You mentioned the sermon this morning, and, it was about David and his fall.
Yeah.
And, it's easy to look at it and say, how could he do this?
Right.
And, what a guy. But Pastor, just showed very clearly how we are liable to have the same thing happen to us.
Sure.
And we learn from the parts of Scripture that aren't all about wonderful things. We learn from it and learn about ourselves.
David was subject to committing murder, committed adultery, and guess what? The Lord loved him. Despite the fact he was a knucklehead at times, and he loved the Lord. And he recognized before too long his faults, and he repented and he corrected them. And I think that has a lot to do with how we view ourselves. Sometimes there are people who find themselves making such stupid choices, especially when they're young, but not necessarily when they're young, but usually. And so they say, I'm just no good. I don't know, no one's going to respect me. I'm not going to have any kind of worth in my life. And that's not true. God can pull you out of that, and you can be a powerful person in his kingdom if you just give yourself the opportunity. When I was superintendent of schools, one of the things that people would comment on is that I had an uncanny ability to forecast the future. And I thought that was a result because I recognized that I could do that to some degree, and it wasn't prognosticating necessarily. It was taking all the evidence and facts and information that I could possibly get, and then I would purposely select scenarios. What would happen if this happened? What would happen if this happened? What would happen if that happened? And line those all up. And then when it began to unfold, I'd have a certain path that I recognized, that I knew pretty much where it was going to end up. And I think that can be true with just our daily lives. If we just kind of think about the consequences of our actions now and forecast them into the future, what can happen? It's just that we don't often reflect. We just kind of do think rather than think do. Any other comments on this? What are some examples of forecasting decisions people make often or have made, including perhaps some life-changing ones? What's the difference in making those decisions whether we're a Christian or not? Can you think of any examples of that? Forecasting into the future? Anyone has done that? No one does this? Yeah.
Well, whenever I think about God, I think about him as my father, and then I compare that to being a parent here on earth. And I think a lot of times we as parents can forecast what our children, may or may not do, and whether that's going to be right or wrong, or
Yeah.
how that's going to affect them. But I think we have to let them have that experience, and then with the values and hopefully them turning to God, that would inform what they do next or how they live their life.
Your son was at Rotary, and I was so proud of him Tuesday. I don't know what he's like at home, but he was just outstanding young gentleman. We were talking, so you must be proud. Anyone else have a thought? Okay, we can move on. How do you reconcile this forecasting and planning for the future with verses in the Bible such as Matthew 6:25, therefore do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, or what you will wear. Can any one of you be, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? So here we have very clear scripture that talks about not being too concerned about those things. Yet I've just said forecasting is very important. The interpretation of most biblical scholars is that Jesus is, in giving the Sermon on the Mount, is not telling us not to prepare for the future or not to put proper food in our mouth and clothes on our body. Jesus is dealing with the fundamental principle of not worrying about the future and what we are going to eat and drink. So how does that work? Why do we always worry? Why is that something Jesus tells us not to do? When do we worry? Why? How can we apply Jesus' teaching in these verses? What does that have to do with wisdom? Now, certainly, of all those questions, you must have an answer to one. What do you think? Read it over again, and then give me your thoughts. We have to have discussion for this to be meaningful, because I need to learn as much from you as you learn from me sharing. Plus, I think it's very important for you to think.
I'm a visitor, and I hope you don't mind if I interject something.
I hope you do.
I think worrying is like you said earlier. You said as we age, we've experienced more, and so I don't really worry anymore. And I'm probably rare, but I really have had some issues where I could have been gone. And so why am I worried? Because when I leave, God is going to be there to accept me. But I think that's hard for us not to worry until we've experienced certain events in our life. And I don't know if that's the answer you really want.
Oh, I think it's a great
why
response.
we worry.
Yeah.
I won't say I'm never concerned,
Yeah.
but I think there's a difference. And I also, my opinion is, if you are worrying, just take time to say a word to God. He isn't always going to right away help you out of that situation, but he will help you.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Someone else? You've read them through.
I've been a worrier all my life until not so long ago. And I also had trouble sleeping all my life. And I went to a sleep psychologist finally because I couldn't get any more sleeping pills because I'm too old. I'm of an age, the doctor said. So,
So you outgrew the opportunity to have sleeping pills?
yeah.
Huh, never heard of that one.
And I could not, and I just couldn't sleep at all. And I'd be awake sometimes all night long. Well, I went to a sleep psychologist and found out that worrying is a big problem
Sure.
and that it has everything to do with whether you can sleep or not.
You weren't letting your
So-
mind rest.
Right, yes. One of the things, and he knew that I was a Christian, and I told him, well, you know, I've tried everything, praying, singing Christian songs at night.
What'd
even
Daryl
my
think of
hus-
that?
He didn't even wake up.
What? Oh, he didn't even wake up? Okay.
He's such a sound sleeper.
Maybe they were soothing.
Yeah. But finally he said, well, you know, write down all your worries. Write them down before you go to bed. And besides writing them down, decide what you're going to do about whatever the situation is you're worried about. And generally it's a situation going on, you know, not just general worrying.
Sure.
It's about specific things. And that really worked. I wrote them down and said, okay, in order to change this, tomorrow I will do such and such, or next week or whatever. And then fold it up and put it beside the bed. And then when I start worrying about it in the night, I'll just tell my brain, stop this because I've already taken care of it. And it sounds weird, but it works. And prayer has always worked too, but it works even better now. So I'm doing better sleeping.
That's great insight. So the bottom line is figure out with some detail what you can do to help the situation be better. And the areas that you have no control over, let go. Recognize you have no control over them. So just be at peace, pray about them, but don't fret because you have no responsibility. You have no control, no ability to change it. That's great. Someone else? This concept of anxiety and worry, you know, that lives with us all the time. Some people are naturally worriers. My mother would get so worked up about things. And we'd be concerned about her because she would get the diarrhea when she got all excited and her stomach would just go terrible. So here I am, ready to get married, and where's my mother? She's in the bathroom. We knew I was wrong. I mean, I knew I was wrong. So I remember consoling her, not in the bathroom, but afterwards, and she attended and everything went fine, but it was just something that plagued her all her life, and she couldn't let go of the fact, and I think it had to do with, she's a very heavy woman, and so she was always concerned about her appearance, especially in public. And so when she was in public, she just felt people were watching her and looking at her, and maybe with a critical eye. And yet, she was such a loving person. Everybody loved her. They didn't look at her weight and see that as a problem, but she couldn't get rid of it. And I just remember having to deal with that all of our lives as we work together. So it can be really harmful. This worrying can be, it can affect your health. It can affect your mental state. It can affect how you deal with people in public and whether or not you're even willing to be in public. So we need to kind of try to figure out how to get a handle on it as a Christian because it can be devastating. And it's something that is not easy to do. And I agree with you. As I've gotten older, I don't worry. I honestly don't. I get concerned just like you said. I grieve. I'm fearful. I have thoughts that are troubling sometimes, but it's not worry. There's a difference. And it's not eating me up because I'm going to do what I can. And right or wrong, I've always had this philosophy pretty much since high school that when I have the opportunity, I will tell the person the truth. Even if it's something that might be controversial or hurtful. If I really feel like they're doing something that might hurt them, I'm looking at their best interest, not mine, I will tell them. as sincere, as honestly as I can. Look, this is hurtful. You're going to hurt yourself. And I've done that with my children. It hasn't always worked well because they haven't always received it well. But now, as they're adults, they're starting to process. As they have children of their own, it kind of made sense what he did, being honest. But at the time, I was a little bit turbulent occasionally. And Larry?
Is there only one mic today?
Yeah. Chris is hobbling around.
Well, the Proverbs are written to give us wisdom so that we would plan properly and do things properly in our life. But sometimes you can do that and the outcome isn't going to be what you predicted.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I can't remember the proverb. I've been looking for it. But the book of James is wisdom literature as well. And it talks about, come now, you who say you do this, that, and the other thing and make a profit and so forth. Instead, you should say, as the Lord wills. So I think James is saying, plan, that's good. But then turn it over to God because you will not really determine the outcome
Yeah.
as well as you think you're going to. I mean, you do as much as you possibly can, but then the rest is up to the Lord.
I think the nugget of worry is the feeling that we need to control. And as soon as you let up on the idea that you get to control it, then you can reduce your worry or eliminate it.
I think some people are given more to control than others, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
There's people who are control freaks and there's people who aren't.
Sure.
And, hopefully you'll be somewhere in between.
Yeah, and I understand. I mean, some people who define it as control and others would define it as leadership skills. So it just depends on your perspective. Anyone else? That's a euphemism. Could be. Contrary to many views of wisdom, it is not age and experience. Age and experience can be important in obtaining wisdom, but just getting older and having more experiences will not help us obtain wisdom. Why is that true? There's a common fallacy. Just because you have been doing something for a long time does not mean that you're doing it right. What are some examples of something done for a long time but not done with wisdom? Can you think of any, or do you have an answer for why that's true? Any thoughts? Yeah. Dave?
Well, I think the fact that we all fall short of the glory of God and we make mistakes, but maybe not learning from them and just repeating them time over time. So having lots of experiences, maybe not good experiences, but not learning from that experience doesn't give you the right kind of wisdom. I guess you have wisdom of continuing to make bad choices, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. What you're saying is you need to learn from your experiences and make adjustments so that you don't make the same mistakes again.
That's a good example.
Yeah. Over here, Dave.
I found in my life that there are people always older than me who've been through a lot, especially my grandmother, who would tell me in whatever circumstances I was in and problems I was having, would point out things that a lot of times when I was younger, you say, well, what do you know? And I learned early on, actually, to listen because my grandmother was full of wisdom and other people in my life, and they knew what could lie ahead if you do this or if you do that. And I have been very fortunate that I did listen, because then I would believe that, even though I hadn't been through the situation all the way through or anything, I would believe them and make some right choices and not end up where I might have ended up if I just leaned on my own understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? You awake back there, Jeff? You're still with me? Okay. Job 32:9 states, age is no guarantee of wisdom and understanding. It does not matter how long you've been doing something. What matters is if you are doing it right. Who can tell me about Methuselah as read about in Genesis 5? Anybody remember the story of Methuselah? Surely you recognize the name, don't you? Methuselah? What's he known for? He was old. No question. Experience is no proof of wisdom. Age is no proof of wisdom. In Genesis 5:27 it states, so all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. So that's what it says about him. Methuselah lived longer than any other person, yet it does not say he did anything for God. He lived and he died. That's what he's credited for. How old he was. You would think that someone who lived longer than anyone else in history would have left a record of something he had accomplished for the Lord. Enoch, on the other hand, in Genesis 5:24, did not live as long as Methuselah, but he had a testimony, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. It is not how long we've been a Christian. It matters what we do since we have been saved. So how does this reconcile with thinking we need to do for God? In other words, what does it matter how we live our life as long as we are saved? And how does God's wisdom apply here? You know, we're told that salvation isn't by works. We know that. And we know that working for the Lord necessarily doesn't give us credit with the Lord. How does this fit? What do you think? How does this fit together? When you look at your life, or someone looks at your life, or someone's going to give a eulogy on your life, what does it matter? How we live our life. Are these questions really too heavy for you? Yeah, there we go, in the back. We finally got someone in the way back. You're going to have to run fast before she escapes and changes her mind.
I don't have an answer, but I do think it gets to the message of where's your heart at. Like Jesus was here, last day he served others, he washed feet. So if your heart is for God, you want to serve others. You don't look at it maybe more like I'm doing it for God. You do because you I don't know, feel that you see the help needed and you go help.
Yeah, great. Any other thought? I had to wrestle with this when I first came to Fulton. We were little, and I was in a position of leadership in the community, and so I was asked to serve on just about every board Fulton had at the time. And I was on the D&D board, and I was on the trustees and so forth. And I began to really think about what I was doing and who I was doing it for and why I was doing it. Because it was like I was working myself to death and not enjoying the Lord in the experience. And I had to back off and decide where I could be most useful for the Lord, that I would be pleased with what I was doing, rather than doing it so that other people could see me doing it, because I had a position, if that makes sense. It wasn't about that. And so I tried, and it was hard, I tried to get it off me of how important I was and get it back into what I could do for the Lord and how important He was, or is. And I think we get hung up on that sometimes. We think that by doing, we show others our commitment, when in fact, we're doing it for the wrong reasons. We're doing it for the recognition that we get for doing it, rather than for doing it for the Lord or doing it because it's going to benefit the body. And that's also a recipe for burnout. So then you're no good to anybody. Any other thought? Still waiting for you, Jeff. When you hear someone say, we should live our life for God, what does that look like? Does God need us to do things for Him? Why do you believe people want to do things for God? How does God use us to fulfill His purpose? What is the difference between the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God? What is the difference between what the world considers wisdom and what God considers wisdom with respect to what does it look like when you hear someone say, we should live our life for God? This is basic stuff. Certainly worth reflecting, because we should be living our life for God.
I've moved away from this idea of being committed because it connotes self-effort.
Mm-hmm. Just what I was talking about when you left.
Okay,
Exactly.
I had to turn the slow cooker on.
I understand.
And there's a pride trip in that.
Yeah.
And I'm committed and they aren't.
Yeah.
So over the years,
And we want recognition for it.
oh yes, and we're kind of proud about doing things for God,
Yeah.
which is totally backwards. Piper talks about the debtor's ethic. Because God has done this for me, I owe Him this. And it's really the wrong motive. Right. And he's dead right. God did what He did, not for us to owe Him something back. He did it purely out of His love and grace, and it's been bestowed upon us. I think the Christian life needs to be one totally of faith in the grace that will meet us each and every day to enable us to do what we got to do. And if there's any part of commitment that I still hold to, it's the surrendered life. You just surrender your life to God. It's not out of guilt. It's not out of something He's done for us. It's just simply, here's my life. Now, you used to talk about that a long, long time ago when I first came here. You were preaching, teaching that. And so I don't know if I've made any sense or not.
No, you did. Yeah.
Did I?
Absolutely.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Right there, Dave, right beside you.
I was talking to someone about God. This happened many years ago, and they didn't really know God, and so they wanted to know why I believed what I believed, and I was just telling them and everything, and I think it was my sister who was there too, and someone said to me, "Is that ever nice that you're doing that and doing that for God?" And I thought about that, and I realized I was doing it for the other person, not for God. I'm sure it would have been what God wanted, but I wasn't doing it for God. I wasn't doing it out of some kind of a belief that I owed God. I was doing it for the other person. And now, when the same thing happens now and then, I really am thinking more about the other person.
I know that what both of you are saying is something that I've experienced here in Fulton and also in other areas, because we have certain things that we're committed to do. I've been playing and singing and men of music for 32 years, and there are Sunday mornings when I get up and say, I don't want to. But that's not a possibility. I will crawl on my hands and knees to get here if I have to, because I feel that that's my responsibility. Now, I have prayed a lot about the fact that I'm not doing it for me and I'm doing it for the Lord, and I'm satisfied with where I'm at with that. But I'm not disagreeing with anything that was said, but I do think there are certain obligations and commitments we need to keep and make if we've given our word, and the Bible talks about that.
And on those mornings, because I've faced those too, I don't want to preach today, you do it by faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know God's called you to do it, and you just believe that God will enable you and that the Holy Spirit will work regardless of how you feel.
Yeah. And both of us have talked about this, but burnout is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing when you feel like you've exhausted your resources and you just don't have much to give. That's really a point at which you can depend on God the most.
Well, I was thinking about whether or not it's wisdom or whatever other gifts that God has blessed us with. It seems that we need to, whether it's out of the love for the other person or out of the love for the Lord, it's sharing those blessings with others that loving others like yourself and all those commandments that we have. So it seems like whenever we're blessed with wisdom, we can't force it on people, but we should have an obligation to share it with those that we love.
Yeah, great. Any other thought? Proverbs 28:14. Blessed is the one who always trembles before God, but whoever hardens their heart falls into trouble. Jesus may have had this proverb in mind when he told the parable of the unmerciful servant in Matthew 18:21 through 35. The servant who owed his master an enormous amount of money was forgiven. But when he met a fellow servant who owed him a small amount, he was harsh and vicious. Failure to forgive others who have wronged you demonstrates that you have forgotten how much you have been forgiven and what it cost Jesus. You know, forgiveness is one of those tricky areas because I have dealt with so much. I mean, I remember as a superintendent of schools and when I was a counselor back in Tomah, Wisconsin, that we would deal with children who were being abused. And when we take it to Rock County and share with them our understanding of the abuse, they would say, literally, we just aren't going to do anything unless there's blood on the carpet. We need to have a lot of physical signs. And I'm thinking, something's wrong with this picture. And I would just bleed inside for what was happening in our society, in our community. And I would see those parents, and it wasn't just fathers, but frequently it was fathers, and the mothers weren't doing anything about it, whether they were afraid or abused themselves, I don't know. But I had such a hard time forgiving them. I just couldn't understand. It just didn't make any sense to me, and I wanted to do something about it, and there was nothing I could do that I knew of. And I think this is a tricky area. This talks about wronging you, but when you feel that there are areas that are unusual or maybe difficult, how do you forgive those people? Do we have to forgive those people? What do you think? No one wants to grab onto that one? Very well. Courageous man in a kilt over here. Once a year.
I think I forgive people, one, because I am commanded to do so. But the other reasons are this. One, I'm being held hostage by my anger. And we think we're holding the other person hostage, but we are not. And so it may not be what you've put there, that, you know, we forget how much we've been forgiven. And that's part of the equation. But the other part is you can't wreck yourself by continually holding in the anger. You have to forgive.
You ever noticed how not forgiving someone doesn't seem to change their behavior at all? So you have to ask yourself why you're not forgiving them or why you are forgiving them, because it's impacting you more than them. So we'll stop there and continue it next week. Thank you.